Now, the other arcade games of 1981.
Hey guys, I'm Pixel Dan and these are the other arcade games of 1981. Gorf! Or Galactic Orbiting Robot Force. That's what Gorf means. Mousetrap. It's a lot like Pac-Man, and not so much like that board game. Lock and Chase. You're a thief collecting coins in a maze, and it's Data East's answer to Pac-Man. Are we seeing a trend here? And those are the other arcade games of 1981. Now, who's gonna let me borrow a quarter?
Right sword.
Guess what my favorite early arcade game is? Donkey Kong.
Donkey Kong was the first successful arcade game by Nintendo, but it certainly wasn't the first. In fact, a Radarscope came out before Donkey Kong, and that was by Nintendo in the arcades.
Nintendo's first arcade machine, the submarine game, was didn't do so well. Actual total failure.
Knowing that they needed to try something different, the company president Hiroshi Yamauchi had Shigeru Miyamoto design a game that they could convert those old unsold copies of Radarscope into.
Actually, I was hired to run the warehouse, and the biggest chore initially was to take all of the Radarscope arcade games, we had 2,000 of them, big refrigerator-sized boxes, and convert them all over to Donkey Kong.
Most Donkey Kong arcades are light blue in color, but every once in a while you come across one that might be a red in color, and that's simply just an old Radarscope cabinet that they retrofitted into a new Donkey Kong arcade machine.
And those red cabinets are probably some of the rarest arcade cabinets you can get, actually.
A lot of people kind of wonder what Donkey Kong means, what the meaning behind it. Now, the influence with Donkey Kong, Shigeru Miyamoto admitted that the big influence for Donkey Kong was Beauty and the Beast and Popeye. In fact, Nintendo was trying to go after the Popeye franchise and they couldn't, so they decided to create their own characters.
He was trying to come up with some sort of synonym for stubborn monkey, the stubborn monkey. And looking up English words, he saw donkey. It's kind of a synonym because donkeys are stubborn, and made that direct translation a little strange, but sure, it's a donkey. It's a donkey monkey.
You know, they just basically, Donkey Kong was going to be like crazy ape.
That's a stubborn monkey. You stubborn monkey. You're a Donkey Kong, aren't you?
Now people look at Donkey Kong and say, you know, it's a Mario game, but back then, the guy was just known as Jumpman. You know, he wasn't Mario. Mario wasn't even around then.
Yeah.
And you weren't saving Princess Peach in the game. You were saving his, I guess it was his girlfriend, Pauline.
Jumpman was renamed Mario, which we all love today. Mario was actually named Mario because it was the name of the Nintendo landlord at the time.
Not only was his original name not Mario, he wasn't the fun-loving plumber that we know and love today. He was actually a carpenter, and Donkey Kong was his pet, who he had mistreated, which is why Donkey Kong busted out of his cage and started kidnapping Pauline all the time.
If I was a pet gorilla locked up too, I would get revenge on my owner by kidnapping his girlfriend. So I don't see what the big deal is, throwing down, you know, barrels at Jumpman. Screw you, Jumpman. This is what you get. I'm gonna take your girl.
You shouldn't have had a pet gorilla in the first place.
One of the, I think, the biggest things that drew people in is it was the first game to technically have a story to it.
It starts off with a beginning of the story, and it proceeds into the action, and then there's actually an ending to the story. You know, that sort of narrative structure, which is present in most video games today, again, did not exist before he introduced it with Donkey Kong.
Donkey Kong was one of the very first platforming games. Space Panic came out before that, but it actually introduced jumping to video games, something we do to this day. Jump.
Oh, I thought you meant play video games.
No, jump. Like,
okay.
If you climb up the ladder, the barrel is going to come down the ladder. If you try to avoid it, then the barrel is going to travel, it's going to drop down, it's going to come over, it's going to kill you.
There's 4 separate screens in the arcade version of Donkey Kong. Now the one, Cement Factory, Mud Pies, whatever you want to call it, is omitted from almost every home port of the game, including all of Nintendo's official ports. But that's kind of unheard of for back then. A lot of times you saw maybe some slight maze changes, or just a repeating screen that got faster and harder. But no, there's distinct separate levels.
You gotta kind of memorize the little quirks of the game, you know. There are certain ways you can just barely, you know, catch the edges of barrels and so forth, and you're just instantly dead.
Donkey Kong is hard. It's really, really difficult.
When I see like Weeby and Mitchell play Donkey Kong, I'm like, screw you.
Go to hell. How can you play that good? It's ridiculous.
The conveyor belts in the Pies level.
Yeah,
that was probably the first time we all cursed out a conveyor belt.
And that screws you because the first wave you don't see that level.
No.
So when you get to it, you're like, what the hell is this? And you don't know what to do.
So you gotta know exactly how to time those jumps, when to leave that hammer be, when to climb up the ladders, when to give up and go play Pac-Man.
Shut up. Shut up. I don't have the life for that. I want to go take a bath.
Well, I don't like to gloat, but there was a competition between Joey, Pat, and I at MagFest, and Joey falsely claimed that he won, but I have picture photo proof of that I won the competition.
I was there. He's telling the truth.
I did it. I got it done.
There was a big lawsuit between Universal Studios and Nintendo.
Doesn't Donkey Kong, didn't they rip off King Kong? Shouldn't we be suing them at this point?
Universal Studios felt there was a copyright infringement with King Kong and the trademark they had there.
Here we are, Universal Studios, we're huge. Here is this little company. It's not the Nintendo of today, it's this little company with a handful of employees. We're gonna go in, we're gonna sue them, and they're gonna be so scared that they're gonna give us a piece of this Donkey Kong action is what's gonna happen.
The stupidest part on Universal is this. Okay, so King Kong comes out in the 30s, and then Universal wants to do a remake in 75, right? And RKO Pictures says, no, you can't do that. And Universal successfully argues in 75, 6 years beforehand, that it is in the public domain.
They find out that Universal did not actually own any copyrights to King Kong.
6 years later, they have the balls to go and tell Nintendo that they own something that they don't.
Long story short, Nintendo won, and also Universal found out they didn't own the rights to King Kong. Oopsie.
And guess who won the case for Nintendo? A little lawyer by the name of Kirby. I wonder if Nintendo, kind of paid tribute to that by making a game character out of him.
Maybe.
Arcade break. I always called it Quicks. Some people call it Kicks.
Taito's Quicks, spelled just like Kix cereal except with a Q instead of a K, was an arcade game that was not nearly as popular as any of the games we've talked about so far, but it was a good game.
Nothing is spelled out in Kix, and other than the fact that you're told to fill a certain % of the screen with color, you don't really know why you're doing this.
You're making little boxes to capture the cakes, quicks, whatever it's called.
Yeah.
I'd like to know what the heck it is. It's just like this magical, colorful thing.
Yeah.
Which actually kind of cool looking.
Look cool.
It looked cool for the graphics of the day. You had this floating thing. I don't know how to describe it. It's just magical.
It's magical.
It started its own genre, which I guess was only kicks, Super Kicks, and then any pornographic game in the 90s with Miss Nude World 94, where you had to fill up, you had to make squares to reveal a nude Asian woman.
I was gonna say, a low quality JPEG of a nude Asian woman.
It's been on so many platforms. It's another one of those games that similar to it, or the game itself has appeared on everything at some point.
Press start. So you think you're fast enough to beat the bomber? I don't think so.
Not only was Kaboom Rue's catchphrase during E3 2012, it was also a popular Atari 2600 game.
It was made by Larry Kaplan, and it uses the paddle controllers.
Kaboom was a gigantic title for the Atari VCS, and it was significant because it began to show that Activision was putting out some of the best games on the system.
Basically, in it, you play as 3 buckets. You are not a human, you are 3 buckets.
The goal of the game was to catch bombs in a plastic bucket that were being dropped by this mad bomber.
Because apparently buckets can withstand an explosion.
The whole time he's dropping bombs, he's got this angry face.
This was terrorism at its finest here.
And then if you miss one and it blows up, he smiles.
You're getting kids ready for the 2000 period.
Yes.
That's pretty twisted for a mainstream Atari 2600 game.
It's a really fast-paced game. It really scratches that itch for, one more time score attack kind of gameplay.
It used the paddle controller, which was awesome. I still love the paddle controller to this day.
It's still popular to this day. It's had re-releases on multiple platforms, but without an actual paddle, it doesn't play anything like it should.
Kaboom!
And now, the freaking awesome computer games of 1981.
Greetings and welcome to Clint's freaking awesome computer games, because if they weren't awesome, I wouldn't give a crap. Now in 1981, we have a lot of Apple II games, starting with Muse Software's Castle Wolfenstein, an early stealth action game where you go around killing Nazis and looting their bodies. You also had The Demon's Forge by Brian Fargo, a graphical text adventure game that has very little to nothing at all to do with forging demons. And lastly, we have Online Systems Soft Porn Adventure, a text adventure game that is far less awesome than it sounds. You just go around and try to get laid with text. And that's it for my freaking awesome computer games of 1981. And there's always plenty of games every year, but it's nice to know where to start.
Arcade break.
Venture. Kind of like Berserk.
Venture is another one of those generic maze games that kind of wanted to go with a fantasy theme to kind of go with the success of Adventure.
And you would have this maze that had usually, I believe, 4 corners, and each corner was its own separate, not really maze, but kind of like almost like a dungeon where they had different obstacles.
Venture was pretty popular at the time and was ported over to a lot of the systems.
Coleco got a good port of it.
It's on Atari 2600.
But that game used to scare the hell out of me when I was a kid. Like, it always made me tense because it was like a scary game. Like, the music made it like very atmospheric and very intense.
The thing I find most interesting about it, frankly, is that the high score on it hasn't changed for like 30 years. I don't know if it's because no one's playing this game or if it's that hard or what, but it's like the high score was done by a kid in Canada in 1982, and no one else has bested it since. Good on him.
So 81 was really the first year we had a video game console war between Atari and Intellivision.
Boy, they were going after each other. They were cutthroat after each other. Ads, attack ads. It was like a political campaign.
Sunday, Sunday, Sunday. It's the Atari and Intellivision war.
You're brown and black, I'm brown and gold. Go f yourself.
Now 80 was a breakout year for Atari due to Space Invaders selling a bazillion copies, and Intellivision was trying to get their foot in the door still. Ah! So what was a good way to do it? Why not compare on TV your technologically superior system to the system that was already 3-4 years old?
And they start warring it out on television with incredibly entertaining advertisements.
With George Plimpton.
I'll try almost anything. So when Mattel Electronics asked me to compare their Intellivision games with Atari, I gave it a try.
Sure, it was no Sega does what Nintendo don't, but it had George Plimpton in that I didn't know, kid.
Excuse me, have you compared them to Intellivision?
Intellivision?
Sure, they've got great space games, like Intellivision Space Battle.
I didn't know.
Who better to compare video game systems than George Plimpton, a middle-aged writer and poet?
He seemed trustworthy.
And he just kind of came across as like, you know, the Intellivision system is so much better than the Atari, you know? And graphically, it was.
So he had written books about what it was like to really train and be with this game. So he was the big sports expert of the common person playing sports.
He wanted to pose a question to the audience, basically.
He would come out and he'd say, "Hi, I'm George Plimpton, and look at, here's Atari baseball. You know. And here's a television baseball," and people are running around bases.
The ball moving, and the characters were actually, that famous Intellivision motion, like all the characters were moving, the smooth animation. It actually looked like a baseball game. Yeah.
And so the dad at home, he looks at the Atari and goes, "I don't see a baseball diamond." But he looks at ours and says, "Hey, it's a baseball diamond."
I'd always heard a lot of stories about people like, I was able to convince my parents to get us a video game system because I was able to convince them to get an Intellivision because my dad wanted to play the baseball game.
The sports games for Intellivision were obviously better than the sports games at the time for the VCS.
You didn't have one, you'd be like, you know what, that Atari baseball game with only 4 guys in the field, yeah, I think I do want the one that actually has all 9.
The very first time that voice was ever used in a video game was MLB Baseball for the Intellivision. The great
You're out. That's what launched Intellivision with the sports games. That was it. And so Atari tried to come back and say, yeah, they got great sports games, but they don't have space games. So, you know, Intellivision, like every time they came out with a commercial, Intellivision was right there with and now here's Space Armada and here's Astro Smash.
Intellivision space games from Mattel Electronics. Once you compare, you'll know.
Comparing directly Star Strike to the Asteroid, which is the big seller on the 2600, basically saying, here's Star Strike with, you know, basically some sort of 3D-ish graphics, and Asteroids looks like trash. That was basically what George Plimpton was saying in a very nice way in his nice gray suits.
And the worst is when he was done. Oh my God. He goes, see? That wasn't so hard.
I think my favorite's got to be the really awkward one with a little kid that like wheels up next to George Plimpton getting out of his car. He's on his little bicycle and he's just like so in awe. He's like, Mr. Intellivision?
Well, your friends aren't going to have this newest one. It's Frog Bog.
Oh, man. They're not going to believe this. Can I get your autograph?
Certainly. What's your name?
My name?
And I talked to George Plimpton years ago before he died, and he said, you know, they actually came in and they gave him an Atari, they gave him an Intellivision, and he had to fill out affidavits for the FTC that he did find Intellivision better. He said, of course they were paying me, so I had an incentive to find it better, but I really did like it better.
The graphics actually looked a lot better. Now, by today's standards, they still look like blocky crap. But back then, you were like, hell yeah, that looks like an actual player. That looks like an actual man running with the soccer ball. That looks like an actual guy batting the ball.
Even today, you know, some people are still, it's very strange, some people today are still, oh, Intellivision versus Atari, oh, Atari was better, oh, this was better, and they're still fighting about this.
Atari did win the console war eventually though, but that's because they had just some really blockbuster hits with Pac-Man, Space Invaders, and things like that, but Intellivision did give them quite a run for its money.
It's kind of ironic that the Intellivision commercials featured E.T.'s Henry Thomas, and the infamous E.T. game was released on the Atari 2600, not the Intellivision, and that the E.T. game led to the demise of the Atari 2600. It's out of this world.